All right, so our last chapter of the week of Hoot is going to be chapter 12. Roy was exhausted. It seemed like 100 years ago that Dana Matherson had tried to strangle him inside the janitor's closet, but it just happened only that afternoon. Thanks, now we're even, Beatrice Sleep said. Maybe, said Roy. They were waiting in the emergency room of Coconut Grove Medical Center, which was more of a large clinic than a hospital. It was here they'd brought Beatrice's stepbrother after carrying him upright for almost a mile, each one of them bracing one of his shoulders. He's going to be all right, Roy said. For a moment he thought Beatrice was about to cry. He reached over and squeezed her hand, which was noticeably larger than his own. He's a tough little cockroach, Beatrice said with a sniffle. He'll be okay. A woman dressed in baby blue scrubs and wearing a stethoscope approached them. She introduced herself as Dr. Gonzalez. Tell me exactly what happened to Roy, she said. Beatrice and the real Roy exchanged anxious glances. Her stepbrother had forbidden them from giving him his names at the hospital for fear that his mother would be notified. The boy got so agitated that Roy hadn't argued. When the emergency room clerk asked Beatrice for her stepbrother's name, address, and phone number, Roy impulsively had stepped forward and blurted out his own. It seemed like the quickest way to get mullet fingers into a hospital bed. Roy knew he was also getting himself in trouble. Beatrice Sleep knew it too. That's why she had thanked him. My brother got bit by a dog, she told Dr. Gonzalez. Several, Roy added. What kind of dogs? The doctor asked. Big ones. How'd it happen? Here, Roy let Beatrice take over the story, as she was more experienced at fibbing to adults. They nailed him at soccer practice, she said. He came running home all chewed up, so we brought him here as fast as we could. Said Dr. Gonzalez with a slight frown. What, you don't believe me? Beatrice's indignation sounded genuine. Roy was impressed. But the doctor was a cool one, too. Oh, I believe your stepbrother was attacked by dogs. I just don't believe it happened today. Beatrice stiffened. Roy knew he had to come up with something fast. The wounds on his arm aren't fresh, Dr. Gonzalez explained. Judging by how far the infection has progressed, I'd estimate he was bitten about 18 to 24 hours ago. Beatrice looked flustered. Roy didn't wait for her to recover. Yeah, 18 hours, that sounds about right, he said to the doctor. I don't understand. See, he passed out right after he got bit. He didn't come home until the next day, when he finally woke up, and that's when he came running in. Then Beatrice called me and asked if I'd help get him to the hospital. Dr. Gonzalez fixed Roy with a stern gaze, though there was an edge of amusement in her voice. What's your name, son? Roy gulped. She'd caught him off guard. Tex, he answered weakly. Beatrice nudged him with her elbow, as if to say, that's the best you can do. The doctor crossed his arms. So, Tex, let's get this straight. Your friend Roy is mauled at soccer field by several large dogs. No one tries to help him. He remains unconscious all night and most of the next day and suddenly wakes up and jogs home. Is that right? Yep. Roy bowed his head. He was a pathetic liar and he knew it. Dr. Gonzalez turned her steely attention to Beatrice. Why was it left for you to bring your stepbrother here? Where are your parents? Working, Beatrice replied. Why didn't you call them and tell them there was a medical emergency? They crew on a crab boat, no phone. Not bad, Roy thought. The doctor, however, wasn't buying it. It's hard to understand, she said to Beatrice, how your stepbrother could go missing for so long and nobody in the family got concerned enough to call the police. Sometimes he runs away from home, Beatrice said quietly, and he doesn't come back for a while. It was the closest thing to a true answer that she'd gotten, and ironically it was the one that made Dr. Gonzalez back off. I'm going to go check on Roy now, she said. In the meantime, you might want to polish up your story. How's he doing anyway, Beatrice asked. Better. He got a tetanus shot, and now we're loading him with antibiotics and pain medication. It's strong stuff, so he's pretty sleepy. Can we see him? No, not right now. As soon as the doctor had gone, Roy and Beatrice hurried outside where it was safer to talk. Roy sat down on the steps of the emergency room. Beatrice remained standing. This isn't going to work, cowgirl. Once they figure out he's not you. It's a problem, Roy agreed, the understatement of the year. And if Lona hears about this, you know he'll end up in juvie detention, Beatrice said gloomily, until he finds a new military school, someplace probably far off, like Guam, where he can't run away. Roy didn't understand how a mother could kick her own child out of her life, but he knew such tragic things occurred. He had heard of fathers who acted the same way, and it was depressing to think about. We'll come up with something, he promised Beatrice. You know what, Tex? You're okay. She pinched his cheek and went bounding down the steps. Where are you going? He called after her. Fix dinner for my dad. I do it every night. You're kidding, right? You're not leaving me here alone. Sorry, Beatrice said. Dad'll freak if I don't show up. He can't make toast without burning off his fingertips. Couldn't Lona cook him dinner this one time? Nope, she tends bar at the Elks Lodge. Beatrice gave Roy a brisk little wave. I'll be back as soon as I can. Don't let him operate or nothing on my brother. Wait, Roy jumped to his feet. Tell me his real name. It's the least you can do after everything that happened. Sorry, girl, but I can't. Made him a blood promise a long time ago. Please? If he wants you to know, Beatrice said, he'll tell you himself. And then she ran off, her footsteps fading into the night. Roy trudged back into the emergency room. He knew his mother would be getting worried, so he asked the desk clerk if he could borrow the phone. It rang half a dozen times on the other end before the Eberhardt's answering machine picked up. Roy left a message saying he'd be home as soon as he and Beatrice finished cleaning up the mess from the science project. Alone in the waiting room, Roy dug through a stack of magazines until he found an old issue of Outdoor Life that had an article about fishing for cutthroat trout in the Rocky Mountains. The best thing about the story was the photographs. Anglers wading knee-deep in blue western rivers lined with tall cottonwoods, rows of snowy mountain crags visible in the distance. Roy was feeling pretty homesick for Montana, and when he heard the approach of the siren outside, he decided it was an excellent time to go find a Coke machine, even though he only had 2 dimes in his pocket. The truth was, Roy didn't want to be in the emergency room to see what the siren was all about. He wasn't prepared to see them wheel in somebody who'd been injured in a serious wreck, somebody who might even be dying. Other kids could be really curious about that gory stuff, but not Roy. Once, when he was 7 years old and his family lived near Milwaukee, a drunken hunter drove a snowmobile full speed into an old birch tree. The accident happened only 100 yards from the slope where Roy and his father were sledding. Mr. Eberhardt had run up the hill to try to help, with Roy huffing close behind. When they reached the tree, they realized there was nothing they could do. The dead man was soaked with blood and twisted at all odd angles, like a broken G.I. Joe doll. Roy knew he would never forget what he saw, and he never wanted to see anything like it ever again. Consequently, he had no intention of hanging around the emergency room for the arrival of the new emergency. He slipped through the side door and wandered through the hospital for about 15 minutes until a nurse intercepted him. I think I'm lost, Roy said, doing his best to appear confused. You definitely are. The nurse steered him back down the corridor to the emergency room, where Roy was relieved to find no chaos or carnage. The place was as quiet as he'd left it. Puzzled, Roy went to the window and checked outside. There was no ambulance in the delivery zone, only a Coconut Grove police cruiser. Maybe it was nothing, he thought, and returned to his magazine. Soon afterward, Roy heard voices from behind the double doors that led to the area where Mullet Fingers was being treated. A loud discussion was taking place in the patient ward, and Roy strained to make out what was being said. One particular voice rose above the rest, and Roy was distressed to recognize it. He sat there in nervous misery, trying to decide what to do next. Then he heard another familiar voice, and he knew there was only one choice. He pushed open the double doors and said, Hey, Mom, Dad, I'm right here. Officer Delinko had insisted on giving the Eberhardts a ride to the hospital. It was the decent thing to do, and also a prime opportunity to score points with Roy's father. The patrolman hoped that Mr. Eberhardt's son wasn't involved in the continuing mischief at the Pancake House construction site. What a sticky situation that would be. On the drive to the hospital, Roy's parents sat in the back seat and spoke quietly amongst themselves. His mother said she couldn't imagine how Roy had gotten bitten by a dog while he was working on a science project. Maybe it was something to do with all that hamburger meat, she speculated. Hamburger, said Roy's father. What kind of school project uses hamburger? In the rearview mirror, Officer Delinko could see Mr. Eberhardt put an arm around his wife's shoulders. Her eyes were moist, and she was biting her lower lip. Mr. Eberhardt appeared as tightly wound as a clock spring. When they got to the emergency room, the desk clerk declared that Roy was sleeping and couldn't be disturbed. The Eberhardts tried to reason with him, but the clerk wouldn't budge. We're his parents, Mr. Eberhardt said evenly, and we intend to see him right away. Sir, don't make me call a supervisor. I don't care if you call the Wizard of Oz, said Mr. Eberhardt. We're going in. The clerk trailed them through the double swinging doors. You can't do this, he objected, scooting ahead of the Eberhardts and blocking the hallway to the patient ward. Officer Delinko edged forward, assuming that the sight of a police uniform would soften the fellow's attitude. He was mistaken. Absolutely no visitors. It says right here in the doctor's notes. The clerk solemnly waved a clipboard. I'm afraid you'll have to go back to the waiting room. That means you too, officer. Officer Delinko shrank away, not the Eberhardts. Listen, that's our son lying there, Roy's mother reminded the clerk. You called us, remember? You told us to come. Yes, and you may see Roy as soon as the doctor says it's allowed. Then page the doctor now. Mr. Eberhardt's tone of voice remained level, but the volume had gotten much louder. Pick up the phone and dial. If you've forgotten how, I'd be happy to show you. The doctor's on a break. He'll be back in 25 minutes, the clerk said tersely. Then she can find us right here, Mr. Eberhardt said, visiting our injured son. Now, if you don't move out of the way, I'm going to drop kick you all the way to Tallahassee. Understand? The clerk went pale. I'm reporting you to my supervisor. That's a dandy idea, Mr. Eberhardt brushed past and started down the hall, guiding his wife by the elbow. Hold it right there, snapped a firm female voice behind them. The Eberhardt stopped and turned. Emerging from the staff-only door was a woman wearing baby blue scrubs and a stethoscope. I'm Dr. Gonzalez. Where do you think you're going? To see our son, replied the Eberhardts. I tried to stop them, the desk clerk piped up. You're Roy's parents? The doctor asked the Eberhardts. We are. Roy's father noticed Dr. Gonzalez eyeing them with odd curiosity. Pardon me if this is out of line, she said, but you sure don't look like you work on a crab boat. What on earth are you talking about? Roy's mother said. Is everyone at this hospital a total wacko? There must be some mistake, Officer Delinko interjected. Mr. Eberhardt is a federal law enforcing agent. Dr. Gonzalez sighed. We'll sort this out later. Come on, let's peek in on your boy. The emergency patient ward had 6 beds, 5 of which were unoccupied. The 6th bed had a white privacy curtain drawn around him. We've got him on IV antibiotics, and he's doing pretty well, Dr. Gonzalez said in a low voice. But unless we find those dogs, he'll need a series of rabies injections. Those are no fun. The Eberhardts locked their arms as they approached the enclosed bed. Officer Delinko stood behind them, wondering what color shirt Roy would be wearing. In the patrolman's pocket was the bright green scrap of clothing that snagged on Mother Paula's fence. Don't be surprised if he's sleeping, the doctor whispered, gently pulling the curtain away. No one said a word for several moments. The 4 grown-ups just stood there, blank-faced, staring at the empty bed. From a metal ring hung a plastic bag of ginger-colored fluid, the intravenous tube disconnected and dangling to the floor. Finally, Mrs. Eberhardt gasped. Where's Roy? Dr. Gonzalez's arms flapped helplessly. I really don't know. You don't know? Mr. Eberhardt erupted. 1 minute, an injured boy is asleep in his bed, and the next minute he's vanished. Officer Delinko stepped between Mr. Eberhardt and the doctor. The patrolman was afraid Roy's father was going to be upset enough to do something he might regret later. Where's our son? Mrs. Eberhardt demanded again. The doctor buzzed for a nurse and frantically started searching the emergency ward. But he was the only patient here, Mr. Eberhardt said. How could you possibly lose the one and only patient you got? What happens? Did aliens beam up in their spaceship and take him while you were on your coffee break? Roy, where are you? Cried Mrs. Eberhardt. She and Dr. Gonzalez began checking beneath the other 5 beds in the ward. Officer Delinko whipped out a portable radio and said, I'm calling for backup. Just then, the double doors to the waiting room flew open. Mom, Dad, I'm right here. The Eberhardts practically smothered their son with a tandem hug. Little devil, chuckled Officer Delinko, hoisting his radio. He was pleased to see that Roy wasn't wearing a torn gray t-shirt. Whoa, Dr. Gonzalez clapped her hands sharply. Everyone hold on a minute. The Eberhardts looked up. The doctor didn't seem especially overjoyed to have found her lost patient. That's Roy, she said, pointing at their son. Of course it is. Who else would it be? Mrs. Eberhardt kissed the top of his head. Honey, get back into that hospital bed right now. Not so fast, Mr. Eberhardt said. I'm not sure what's going on here, but I've got a feeling that we owe the doctor an apology. Probably several apologies. He planted both hands on Roy's shoulders. Let's see those dog bites, partner. Roy lowered his eyes. I didn't get bit, Dad. It wasn't me. Mrs. Eberhardt groaned. Okay, now I get it. I'm the crazy one, right? I'm the raving loony bird. Folks, excuse me. We've got a major problem here. We've still got a missing patient. Officer Delinko was thoroughly confused. Once again, he reached for his radio in anticipation of calling headquarters. Before my brain explodes, said Mrs. Eberhardt, would someone please explain to me what this is all about? Only one person can do that, Mr. Eberhardt gestured towards Roy, who suddenly wanted to crawl into a hole and hide. His father turned around to face Dr. Gonzalez. Tex, she said in an arching eyebrow. Roy felt his face redden. I'm really sorry. This is a hospital. This is no place for games. I know it's not. I apologize. If you're the real Roy, the doctor said, then who was that young man in the bed and where did he go? I want the truth. Roy stared at the tops of his sneakers. He couldn't remember another day in his life where so many things had gone wrong. Son, his father said, answered the doctor. His mother squeezed his arm. Come on, honey, it's important. You can be sure we'll find him, Officer Delinko chimed in, sooner or later. Bleakly, Roy looked up to address the grown-ups. I don't know the boy's name, and I don't know where he is, he said. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. And technically, it was. So let's pull up the questions for today. There's just one this time. I want you to practice your summarizing skills and summarize Chapter 12 with at least 2 details. Let's aim for more, though. So that was Chapter 12. Thanks for reading along with me. I'll see you on Monday.